Fallout 76's Steel Dawn DLC is finally here. After a bit of a mishap or mistake on the part of Bethesda, we got a surprise drop late on Tuesday night, and over the past couple of days I was able to play and complete the DLC in its entirety. In this video, I want to do a couple of things. First and foremost, give my opinions and a review on this. I was fortunate enough to complete the DLC questline twice now, so I do actually have some pretty extensive thoughts about how it plays out, what it does right, and also some of the weird problems it does have. How, for me, it felt almost disappointing but extremely exciting, and more so on that last point of it being exciting. At the end of this one, I also want to do a spoiler discussion of the DLC. For those of us who have completed it, and I imagine many of you have already, go over where the game could go next, because this DLC really opens things up. There are a lot of potential avenues, and it gets me pretty interested or excited for the future of Fallout 76. But also, hopefully this video will serve to answer the question, is this worth returning to the game for? Is it worth buying the game for even? With that said, if you guys enjoy the content or want to see more in the future, you can leave a like or subscribe. It's the best way to help this video with the YouTube algorithm. But with that said, I would be amiss if I didn't initially mention that this DLC was actually a mistake, or at least the release date being now was a mistake. It was intended to come out on December 1st, but Bethesda had a bit of a mishap where they accidentally released the update on Xbox, so Xbox users couldn't play the game because technically their game was too far updated, and it seems like Bethesda kind of called a last minute audible of, alright, let's just release it now. Everyone's home for Thanksgiving anyway, and Bethesda, especially with Fallout 76, who has had a history of handling things poorly, did a great job here. They turned what otherwise would have been some intermittent frustration for Microsoft and Xbox users to actually a really nice surprise for just about everyone. Of course, specifically in the US where people have off and this holiday. Although it's important to note that this means it is not a complete package as a result. Most of the content is here, but things like random encounters, which were data mined, aren't currently activated. So there might be some miscellaneous Brotherhood interactions in the future, but it doesn't seem to be active at least just yet. And also, considering this kind of was released early, the bugginess definitely seems to be minimal. I only had a few issues. Sometimes the quest markers wouldn't work, so it would point to the wrong thing, which led to some confusion, but it was pretty easy to work around. I did also have one crash while playing, but that might not even be DLC specific, and overall, the bugs are minor and easy to ignore. I would actually say overall, this was less buggy than Wastelanders for me, and Wastelanders had several delays before it came out. So at its core, what this DLC is going to do is re-add the Brotherhood of Steel to Appalachia. And to be frank, when that was announced, when Bethesda did reveal that this is where they were taking the game, I was pretty disappointed. Bethesda loves to shoehorn the Brotherhood of Steel in all of their games in one way or another. And I gotta say, even though that was my initial reaction to the announcement of this, having played this twice now, it may be one of the best implementations of the Brotherhood of Steel in a Fallout game. Not just for Fallout 76, but for Fallout overall. The vast majority of the time when you're doing a Brotherhood questline or meeting them in a Fallout game, they're kind of these isolationists. You do a couple of quests for them specifically, kind of cut off from the rest of the world or caring about their problems. And yeah, you could go talk around to other factions, or the Brotherhood of Steel will oftentimes interact with other factions. But one of the really cool parts about Steel Dawn with Fallout 76 is immediately it showcases the Appalachian Brotherhood of Steel as one, having some internal conflict, but two, in the context of a living world. You will meet a bunch of people right off the bat in the story, but also all throughout the story that have opinions. They have reactions to the Brotherhood of Steel being there. Some people just dislike the Brotherhood of Steel right off the bat. They have formed their opinion already. Others are more cautiously optimistic. They're almost a new invading force, but that doesn't have to be a bad thing. They could offer protection. They could offer resources or be valuable in some other way. And then some people just don't even really know what's going on. But this contrast and this dynamic with the world overall was pretty cool, and actually ties into some of that older Wastelanders content. So you could talk to the leader of the Settlers, the leader of the Raiders, and the Vault 76 Overseer, when each of them will have their own opinions and reactions around the Brotherhood of Steel. The Overseer in particular does have quite a bit of dialogue you can get into after they arrive. Among fans, the Brotherhood of Steel tends to be pretty polarizing, and I think one of the cool parts about this implementation is you get to see that not just in your own eyes by doing quests for them, but also among some of the people who live in the world, which was a pretty unique perspective, and I'm happy Bethesda took that. But even further, it's not just the Brotherhood of Steel of past Fallout games. We all know those isolationists that want to hoard technology for themselves and have a superiority complex. One of the cool things they did with the Brotherhood of Steel here is there's actually really two halves to them, almost two sides of the Brotherhood of Steel you can see. Right at the bat, this of course is a different Brotherhood of Steel. In all the other Fallout games, it takes place hundreds of years later, so now we are much closer to the founding, the roots of the Brotherhood of Steel. The person who found the Brotherhood is still the one leading them, but it also seems like the Brotherhood of Steel overall is beginning to transition to the Brotherhood we had in past games. And in Steel Dawn, you really get the two sides of this. Shin, who is technically second in command of this Appalachian Brotherhood of Steel, is most similar to the Brotherhood of Steel we've known from the past. He wants to collect technology, but mostly for self-preservation. He has almost that superiority complex, only self-serving. Conversely, Paladin Romani, who is technically the leader of this Brotherhood of Steel, is way more aligned with the Brotherhood of Steel founder, interested in collecting technology, but using it for the betterment of everyone, helping others. Consistently throughout the DLC, literally from the first minutes of the DLC, you will see these two having conflicts around this issue. They agree that they need to preserve and collect technology, but what exactly they're going to do with that and how they interact with other people or factions does really divide them. But both can make solid points, and that's one of the interesting parts about this. You actually have options to kind of represent one side or the other. Throughout this, you will talk with the other factions of Appalachia, and throughout the dialogue and quests, you could do things that align more so with that of Shin, or other things that would be more in favor of Romani. And oftentimes you'll end up telling the two of them what you did, and they of course will either like you or dislike you for it. Not that that really has any impact, but it is something that is represented in the dialogue and quests, which was pretty cool. And overall, as far as the questing experience itself, it's definitely really enjoyable. The voice acting was solid. At no point did it really take me out or like, wow, this is kind of a subpar job, even though I'm sure voice acting and getting some of that recorded was more difficult due to the ongoing virus. As far as rewardable items, you do get a variety of unique weapons from this. A unique weapon being something that is just a legendary variant that is kind of specific. So via some of the quests, you'll get a legendary that's named and has certain legendary effects. Everyone gets the same one. These are okay. Some of them were more useful. It obviously is going to depend on your build. Unfortunately, none of these are of the new weapons. You will just get the new weapons by doing the DLC, but it's just the regular version. So you get one copy of the rocket launcher, which isn't legendary, which is kind of cool, but for most builds, it's not going to be that good because, again, it's not legendary. I feel like this would have been a lot better if it actually gave you a random legendary roll. The cave diver suit is finally added to the game, and even a couple of camp items. There's some new locations added with this. The vast majority of these you're just going to experience by doing the quests. Some locations are overhauled, like Fort Atlas, while some others are just totally new. None of these were super impactful. They're definitely cool or interesting new locations, but for the vast majority of them, you'll go there while doing the quests and potentially never return. And one of the other cool features is from time to time, the NPCs would commentate on our status as a notable person in Appalachia, kind of taking a step back and be like, oh wow, it's you. This DLC very much so felt like an expansion or really a building on top of what was added with Wastelanders. And it really feels like it's formatted that you should play Wastelanders before Steel Dawn. I don't know if you would necessarily miss anything as much as it would just be a better experience to have done Wastelanders first. You do interact with both the raiders and the settlers. There's new little subparts of those two factions, so it's not like they were forgotten. You also get some benefits in dialogue as a result of completing Wastelanders or other aspects of vanilla Fallout 76, like becoming general of the Enclave does come into play at one point. And for many of those systems, whether it be the dialogue interface, human NPCs, or other things added with Wastelanders, this is kind of just reusing them. It's more content using those systems, not trying to overhaul or vastly improve them. Not that they had to be improved, it's not like they had major issues with Wastelanders, but don't expect something that's totally revamped here. And overall, the DLC in general is definitely another single-player-esque experience. Of course, Fallout 76 is a multiplayer game, you could kind of do it with others, but you're probably going to be doing these quests by yourself. And it definitely feels like that's the intended way to experience them. And especially as a single-player experience, one of the points that really stood out to me as being notable and significant, there's one segment where you're going through a bunker and you're by yourself. It's spooky, creepy, the lighting is dim, and you are fighting some kinds of enemies. And it definitely is a nice immersive experience that might scare you a little bit, especially if you are at a real threat of dying. One of the other interesting parts about this DLC is it's the first one following one wasteland. So with Wastelanders, oftentimes you kind of just clear through it pretty quickly and easily because you are high level playing lower level content in a way. But now, since all of the enemies scale to your level, you oftentimes had way more challenge than otherwise simple tasks. So sometimes you'd be facing level 100 enemies depending on your level, and it made the DLC overall far more challenging. But with that said, the DLC, at least for me, definitely isn't perfect. And one of the biggest issues I have when it comes to reviewing this is, in many ways, it feels like I'm trying to review half a book. Like, you know, when some YouTubers get the opportunity to review certain TV shows and they let them only watch the first 3 episodes out of a 10 episode season, I feel like that's what this is. I got to experience 30-40% of Steel Dawn or the Brotherhood of Steel questline overall, and now I'm trying to review it, but it's clearly not complete. In the past, Bethesda said they were combining Steel Dawn and Fractured Steel into one, so it felt more cohesive. And although that technically might be true, this isn't a complete story experience. It does have a beginning, middle, and end, but at the end you're kind of like, wait, that's it? It ended? Like, it doesn't even really feel like it should be the ending point. It feels like it should be the end of Act 1. That's not to say Bethesda is lying when they said they combined Steel Dawn and Fractured Steel. It is to say that Steel Dawn and Fractured Steel were really small then, as this story overall is probably only 3 to 4 hours depending on how quickly you do things. You could probably stretch it out to 6 hours of story content if you're a low level, if you have to walk everywhere, and if you go through all of the dialogue extensively. But in my play, which was pretty typical, I was fast traveling, didn't have a ton of problems with combat, but sometimes I did die, and at points I went through the dialogue extensively, at other points I kind of skipped through things a bit more quickly. It only took me about 4 hours. And that's not to say it wasn't enjoyable, it was still 4 hours of interesting content, a nice introduction to the Brotherhood of Steel. It just lacked that finality. It sets up the stage for something that you don't get to see yet, and it kind of left me just wanting more, which is both a good thing but a bad thing because we don't even know when more is coming. Bethesda is reportedly having a Fallout 76 trailer at the Game Awards, so I wouldn't be shocked if that's when we find out more. But without giving spoilers, towards the end of this DLC you have to make a big choice, and that choice just literally has no consequence. You just make it, it's a big moment, and you're like, oh, okay, that's it. And choice is one of the other things that definitely falls short with these Fallout 76 DLCs compared to other RPGs or even just other Fallouts. All throughout the DLC, you have moments where you can make a decision one way or the other, and some of these can feel pretty sizable, but it doesn't actually do anything. It's really the facade of choice, not actually having choice. Right at the bat with this one, you have to side with the Brotherhood of Steel. That's the story content. If you don't want to partner with them, you could kind of make snarks at them, you could try and hurt them, but at the end of the day, you are joining the Brotherhood of Steel in this DLC. That's the only avenue you could go. You could just kind of be rude about it along the way. And just overall, for some of the choices, it feels like it is a big deal. You actually have to think, all right, who am I going to choose here? It is a hard decision to make, but it doesn't actually affect anything. The game and the story progresses in exactly the same manner regardless of what you picked. Now, as far as the big final choice with this, that'll likely come into play whenever part 2, etc. comes out later on, but even ignoring that one, all the other choices you make throughout, whether it be to save someone or not, to give someone supplies or not, it's a nice outlet for role-playing and getting into your character, but in tangible terms, it doesn't make a difference. And the incomplete nature of this DLC is one of those things that makes me wonder, is now the best time to play? Because the content we have is good, but I do wonder if it wouldn't just be better to play it in the future. The new weapons and armor added in with this are added in through daily ops, so you're going to have to grind through daily ops to get them, which is fine. I don't inherently disagree with that system, but Bethesda didn't add any new daily ops here, so you have a totally new grind on familiar and old content that's probably getting at least somewhat stale, at least for me. I enjoy daily ops, it's one of my favorite features of the year, but I've played all the combinations numerous times. It would have been really nice if with this one, since we're going to have to play it again for new content, they added in maybe a new map or a new game mode or a new mutation, or even all three of those. We know this is coming in the future, it's just not here yet. It's probably coming with part 2 of the DLC. The story itself is clearly a part 1 or part 2. I wouldn't be shocked if the story overall feels more satisfying to play in a cohesive way, where you complete part 1 and then part 2 is immediately there to experience. You get to see the results of the choices you make somewhat, or even just where things go from here. The story itself right now is still a good and fun experience. It just left me wanting more, and I have an indeterminate amount of time to still wait for more. And even little things left this feeling incomplete, like there's really no incentive to return to the Brotherhood of Steel HQ once you complete the story content. It doesn't even have its own vendor or gold bullion drop-off boxes. I feel like small gestures like that would have at least given you some incentive to return. A new event or even these new expeditions would be a cool reason to come back here, and I wouldn't be shocked if we see expeditions being Brotherhood of Steel themed in the future, but at least for right now, once you beat this, you could kind of walk away and forget about it, just doing daily ops for the new content. So overall, I would say this new DLC is a solid first part. If you already own Fallout 76, or if you're somebody who's been actively playing it already, there's no reason to not play this. It's free, it's good content, and you'll probably enjoy it, especially if the only cost is just some hard drive space and re-downloading the game. On the flip side, if you're somebody who has a ton of other games you're looking to play, or even if you don't own Fallout 76 at all right now, to me, Steel Dawn doesn't feel like a must play right now. I imagine once the story is complete, it's going to be epic and definitely get that must play status similar to Wastelanders. But at least for now, if you wait a few months for the rest of this to come out, I don't think that would be ill-advised, and I really really don't think you'd be missing much. If anything, I could see the comprehensive experience being a bit better. And speaking of what's next, I am really excited for it. Bethesda managed to add the Brotherhood of Steel, a very familiar and kind of tired faction, into this game and actually make them interesting, actually make them a bit different than the past. While I was playing this, even though I had those concerns before launch, I never thought like, oh great, more Brotherhood story content. This time it genuinely felt pretty different based off what you were doing and how you were interacting with the world. And I am very excited as to where they take this in the future, which, speaking of, this will now be the spoiler part of this video. I'm going to go into some of the reveals or spoilers we got during the Steel Dawn questline, so if you haven't played it yet, I do suggest clicking off now. But otherwise, with the ending of Steel Dawn, and specifically the choice to side with either Romani or Shin, I have a feeling the way they're going to handle this is it'll almost be like Wastelanders-esque with two opposing factions, the Raiders and the Settlers, except this time you'll have the Brotherhood of Steel and then the new Appalachian Brotherhood of Steel led by Romani, the older Brotherhood of Steel led by Shin. You'll probably have quests and some conflicts between them, and you could try and pick which Brotherhood of Steel do you want to align with more closely, or at least I think that's one of the avenues they could go with this. To me, it really seems unlikely they remain together just based off the leaving off point. Shin just seemed kind of past the point of no return. He was tired of dealing with Romani's BS, and Romani seemed like she wanted to genuinely go in a different direction. But I think this premise of having almost two distinctive questlines like Wastelanders, but two that interact much more heavily or are around a conflict that's more direct, could be pretty cool. Either way though, I'm really excited to see where they go next. I feel like they gave themselves a really good building off point, the ability to explore this almost civil war between this Appalachian Brotherhood of Steel, who's already been through a lot. Some of the loose ends I wonder if come into play in the future are things like the Crater War Party. It seems like they are these really cool people that have a ton of potential as an antithesis to the Brotherhood, but they really pop up for like, what, 5 minutes of gameplay? You literally just have one optional objective to help them out by giving them some of that Brotherhood data. So I definitely hope that they have a larger role in the future, they do more overall. I think that's another part of this that has a lot of potential. Maybe you're forced to side with the Brotherhood somewhat to complete the story content, but it'd be cool if you had a way to kind of screw them up, or actually stage an ambush against the Brotherhood of Steel overall. That would be really cool. Or maybe you could even get one of the Brotherhood of Steel factions to align with the Crater War Party and then have a even bigger force against the other faction. Another one I have some questions about are aliens. If you missed it, as you're exploring the Enclave research branch, you could see some aliens through one of the doors. There's been a lot of speculation as to whether or not this is a hint or a tease that aliens will be in the next DLC or have a larger role. And although I think that'd be really cool, I don't think so. I think they'll always just kind of be in the background overall. I think it'd be cool at some point to have a mysterious alien DLC, maybe even just something on the smaller scale, kind of similar to how they handled the Sheep Squatch. Some mysterious stuff starts popping up and then eventually we get a new event around the Sheep Squatch. And then lastly, one of the final things that I think could be big with the Brotherhood of Steel are expeditions. And I think that could be one of the coolest ways to reward you for the quest line. Technically, we don't know much about expeditions outside of them being on the roadmap, but it seems pretty safe to assume it's going to be a Brotherhood themed thing where we go in search of new technology to outside of Appalachia. In some past interviews, Bethesda has even mentioned this is something they're considering, not necessarily with expeditions, but just in general. Imagine having a short little quest or mini DLC that takes you to the capital Wasteland. How epic would that be? Seems like it's such a nice and easy implementation with the Brotherhood of Steel. You literally just get into a vertibird. There's a lot of cool things they could do with that, and you also have to wonder how many more DLCs can they fit in Appalachia. The map's getting pretty full. This one didn't really add nearly as much or overhaul as much as Wastelanders, but I have to imagine on their roadmap they're kind of starting to consider, alright, when do we start adding in some new world space, because we're gonna have to eventually. Either way though, those are my thoughts. I'm really excited for the future of Fallout 76. Again, we are getting a new trailer at some point. Technically the trailer is listed as coming out on the 11th, which is the day after the Game Awards, but it's labeled as the Game Awards trailer, so who knows what's gonna happen. Either way though, hopefully you guys found this one informative. Hopefully you're enjoying the new Fallout 76 content. There's definitely a decent chunk of it to experience. But until next time, I thank you all for watching again, and I hope to see you all later.